Excellent. Thank you, Bethan. Noswaith, good evening, everybody, and welcome to my Freeport Facebook Live. I'm here in Bentlek. I'm looking at an amazing view of the sea out here, and I'm at the Breeze Hill bar and eatery here in Bentlek. Why? Because I'm hoping to go and see the Wizard of Oz afterwards at 7:30. So this is why I'm not taking the Facebook Live from my office. I've had a fantastic week here on Honest Morn. At the weekend, I did the reading in St Cubby's, the Easter service reading in St Cubby's Church in Holyhead. And then I was went along to the Chemice to see the RNLI Safety Day. So a big shout out to Daffith, the harbour master, and the kayaking team, the Chemice swimming team, and particularly to Tony, who is the Tony Price, who's the coxswain for the RNLI Holyhead team there. It's been a really, really excellent week, and I've enjoyed bumping into many of you. Lots of warm welcome. So thank you very much. So tonight we've got a very, very special guest on the show tonight. We've had M-Spark, we've had Mensa Morn, we've had Stena, we've had lots of other people. But tonight we've got Joe Batchel, who is the CEO of Anglesey Mining. And he's got some very, very exciting news that he would like to share with you. Thank you, everybody, for all your questions that you emailed in. Please pop your questions into the chat so that we can actually see those questions again. But Joe, big warm croeso, big warm welcome to my Facebook Live. Perhaps you'd like to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and you know, how did you end up being CEO of Anglesey Mining?
Yeah, thanks, Virginia. Thanks for having me on. Well, look, I mean, my background. I mean, you're looking at the beaches of Bentlek. I'm down in Cornwall, which is where I was born. So I've just come down here for Easter. Well, look, my background was went through school, loved geology, went down to Camborne School of Mines back in Cornwall to get my degree in geology, and then went off to Australia for 20 years, and you know, whilst down there, had 10 years experience with one of Australia's largest mining companies that got taken over by BHP, and I went into the finance sector and basically worked for a number of investment banks, including Citibank or Citigroup and UBS, involved in a lot of capital transactions, probably raised over $5 billion of funding for mining projects globally. Came back to the UK about 7 years ago. A combination of events. My mother was diagnosed with motor neurons disease, so we came back to spend some time with her. And I got a transfer with UBS. After a couple of years, just had enough of dealing with finance, which I think you can certainly agree, and got back into getting my hands dirty with mining, and about 18 months ago or 20 months ago, saw the opportunity to look at Paris Mountain, and I don't have a history with Paris Mountain, but I'm very familiar with it. Some friends of mine from an Australian mining company back in 2008 tried to buy it off Anglesey Mining back then, and I spent a bit of time with them. So I was fairly familiar with it, and I just think it's a terrific opportunity, but it's an opportunity that should have been taken a long time ago. Is my personal view, Virginia. You know, there's a great project there that's been a long time coming.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joe. Excellent background. So a lot of the questions coming in, people want to know, what does it actually mean to them? You've talked about 120 local jobs in the near term, rising to 400 to 500 jobs in the medium to long term, and the supply chain. When can people expect to see some change? What sort of what sort of hurdles do you have to get through, and what does this mean for people locally?
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, I'm very cautious about setting expectations, and you know, I have to wear sort of two hats here. One is with public investment, investor markets and public markets, and continuous disclosure requirements, and then also community and stakeholder expectations. And when I joined, the company had been, and certainly the asset had been in almost cryogenic suspension for a decade, and so it was never going to be a case of raise some money, raise a small amount of money to kick the work programs off again and get up and running, as in producing and employing 120 people. There's a lot of work and a lot of process that's got to go on in the background, and we're dealing with a project that's been around for a long time, as all of your your voters would be aware, and your constituents would be aware. But we've got to bring that data up to sort of modern standards. There's been a lot of change in reporting standards over the last sort of 15, 20 years. There's been changes to the Town and Country Planning Act, which is what governs the permitting and the consent of this project. So there was always work to do, and unfortunately, there's a lot of, and again, this is putting my stockbroker hat on and my banking hat on. Unfortunately, there's a lot of sort of stale investors within Anglesey mining that thought that all the work had been done 10, 15 years ago, and we could just come in, start mining, and everything would be rosy. But no, there's still some work to do, and we've over the last sort of 15 months we've taken limited resources we've had, and we've spent those very judiciously and tried to bring all of the relevant bits of information and technical aspects up to a certain standard that we can then put into a feasibility study, which will be a pre-feasibility.
So Joe, in terms of those 120 jobs, when would you, if all things going well, when would you expect to be recruiting? And we've already had people on the questions, and one of them has come from Annabelle. And she said she would love to, Annabelle Ackroyd says, I love my time on the mountain when I worked there, when it was open the first time, and I'd love to be involved again. So already, Joe, you've got people who want to support you and get involved again. So I think it's fair to say to them, when will you be advertising jobs?
Totally. And I mean, again, with not wanting to sort of falsely set expectations, but we've got to do this. We've got to do the financial study. So at the end of the day, if the project doesn't make money through our financial evaluation, then it's we have to sort of go back to the drawing board, scratch our heads, and kind of go, okay, what do we do? And there's always a chance that could happen. But from what I've seen, I think there's a fairly robust project there. I think we've got to go through the pre-feasibility study, and the feasibility study is probably 12 months work. In the background, we have to be doing getting the permits and the consents activated and granted, which is what we're doing. We've been doing that progress for 8 or 9 months now, and we've probably got another 12 months to do that. So I think in 12 to 15 months, we should be in a position to know whether we go forward with a development, which would then be setting the timeline for funding, construction.
Okay.
So
So that's great for Annabelle to know. So 12 to 15 months, and she runs Sarah Embroidery with her partner in Amlock. So I'm sure she would love. If you need anything embroidered, I think Annabelle will be there. Will be there for you. And then in terms of engagement with the community, it's fantastic that you're doing this Facebook Live. I know you had an open day for councillors and a lot of stakeholders last Wednesday. You were in Amlock in the town hall there as well last Wednesday afternoon, and you're very, very keen to engage with the community. And you were saying to me you're actually hoping to get something on the high street in Amlock where people can come in 2 or 3 days a week and speak with people. I know you're very, very open about sharing your mobile number, and would you give tours if people are interested?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, we've always made a commitment to any shareholders that want to come up and have a look. And my view is anybody that has got a vested interest in it, whether it be as a local stakeholder, community stakeholder, or shareholder, should come up and have a look, because I think it's very important. And hopefully, you saw that when you were on site. When you can stand there with somebody from the company and be pointing and have everything pointed out to you as to where the portal's going to go and where the waste rock's going to go and stuff like that. It's not going to look massively different to what it looks like now. In fact, there's certain elements that will look a lot better than it does now. So yeah, look, we'd encourage people to get up there and have a look. In terms of the process we were running last week, it was with that open day is really part of the permitting process and the consent process. And so as part of that, we believe, and look, I mean, one of the hardest questions I get asked by anybody, Virginia, so please don't ask me, is how long does the permitting take? Because I'm on the board of another company in Australia called Silver Mines, and we just got our permit for that project in New South Wales last week, and that took 6 years. Now, hopefully, it's a very different situation here, given we're a dormant project, and it's almost a restart as opposed to a new permit application. Although this is slightly mixed. Part of that permitting process, we're very keen to get a community liaison officer appointed as soon as possible and have them working for us 3 to 4 days a week. And as you say, we look to try and get a shop window in Amlech somewhere and on the high street and have it open 2-3 days a week for people to come in and start asking those questions. We're going to have situations where I have no doubt there are going to be some people that are unhappy with a mine development. The not in my backyard or NIMBY is very real, and it's something we have to deal with, and not necessarily a negative way, but you have to deal with whatever's thrown at you. And the benefit of having a community liaison officer is that people can come in, they can vent their spleen, or they can ask, when should we submit our CVs, whatever. It's for the good and the bad.
Well, you sound very refreshingly open, Joe, and I'm sure Annabelle Ackroyd, she seems like the perfect community liaison officer for you, someone with experience with the mine. But when we're talking about community, I think it's important for the community to know that this is going to be all below ground, isn't it? And could you, because obviously everyone drives past the sort of the mountains there, and they can see it, and they sort of think of copper, etc., etc. What are people going to physically see that might be different, if at all?
Well, some of it you'll see cleaned up. I mean, we'll make an open commitment to the entire community that access to the mountain as it is today will not change. So walks around all the old workings, or the historic workings, and the elements that have significant heritage value for the local community. None of that's going to change. In fact, I mean, for those that do drive past the site, they may see a little bit more activity over on the other side of the road, where the shaft is, where the head frame is, and where the site offices are. Fundamentally, that's where most of the work is going to be happening, on that side. And in terms of mining, we're not doing any mining on surface. It starts at 60-70 meters underground and goes down to 500 meters underground. So we're very keen to make sure, and as part of that community liaison role is ensuring that people know that when they look up at the hill, hopefully they'll see the head frame turning and things happening there. But fundamentally, they're not going to see a lot of difference. As you drive past the mountain as well, there's some of the listeners may see or know of that. There's an old steel frame building there, which is where the original pilot plant was back in 1991. That will also be where the processing plant is. Should we go ahead with the development? And again, it will be in a building, so all people will see is a building. And that will contain any potential noise pollution or dust pollution. So I mean, wherever you build a mine these days, you have to take world's best practice with you, Virginia, and that's really important to stress to everybody that it's quite common to have what are known as zero discharge mines. So just basically nothing gets out. And at the moment, we've got a situation where there's an enormous legacy of, and just through nature, not through mining, but through nature. I mean, I'm a geologist originally, and Paris Mountain is an outcrop of volcanic rock with lots of sulfides in it, and lots of copper and lots of metals. And every time it rains, they just leak into the soil and leak into the local streams. And
so it's very acid pH.
Yeah. We've, as part of our environmental work, which we've done extensive work up there now for the baseline. We've had to test every body of water up on the mountain, and the average pH is 2.8.
You're right.
So it's like battery acid. Every bit of water there is like battery acid. And fundamentally, I think the mine is going to be quite a dry mine underground, and the process plant is going to need water. So we've got an opportunity to actually capture all of the water that goes off the mountain, whether it's in the Afongok North or Afongok South, and neutralize it and send it back up to the process plant. So there could be some enormous. So
net it could be net it could be positive. So Felicity Elphick says, I love Paris Mountain. I paint there and love to see something so special to the past history of the island, and I'm so proud of it. So much so that I bought shares over 30 years ago. I truly hope the future will be a win-win. Now, I keep bumping into lots of people, Joe, over the island that have bought shares. So you mentioned specifically that especially shareholders you would have engagement with. I think that's very encouraging. And then from Gwendon Holiday Home on Anglesey, they say, does the Welsh Government and Anglesey Council back the project?
Well, I can't say yes or no to whether they'll back it, because that will all be formed part of the planning consent process. So we have to do the right thing and demonstrate that we can do it appropriately and at world's best practice. But the commentary coming out of, and we haven't spoken to, well, we've spoken to Blaid Cymru, member for the Welsh Assembly, Welsh Government, but we've had no contact with any ministries, and we've not gone out there with our cap in hand to any agency, with the exception of we've put in application for a grant through the Shared Prosperity Fund recently, just to help with the environmental and the consent work. But everybody that comes to site walks away and says, look, this is potentially a wonderful opportunity for the region, and I don't expect anything from anybody other than to be supportive in terms of their comments or whatever. We're not at the point yet where we can go to government agencies and say, right, we need $10 million for this, or we need $5 million for that. I mean, we've got to go through the study. So, but yes, the answer is yes. People are making very positive comments.
Okay, no, that's great. And then we've had lots more positive comments coming through. In terms of Joe, Dusky Cymraeg, are you learning Welsh? How's your Welsh? And how will these jobs on the island, how will they help us with the Welsh language? I think everyone sort of says no jobs, no Welsh language. So will you specifically be looking to harness all the fantastic things about the community and the Welsh language?
Look, totally. I mean, my attempts at learning Welsh. I mean, my parents have lived in South Wales for since 1986, I think. My brother was born in Newport, and so all of my nieces and nephews who have all been to school in Wales, they all speak Welsh. So I should be getting some lessons from them. But look, I mean, fundamentally, look, we've made a commitment to the Anglesey County Council and the Amber Town Council that we will employ local. And as we discussed last week, Virginia, when you were on site, there's a part of the existing or the extant planning permission we have. There is something in the wording of the agreement about employing local. And local is defined as, at the moment it's defined as people that have got a tie to the region and have had for over 5 years. To bring some of my experience to bear here. I mean, I worked at the tin mine. I went to South Crofty in Cornwall when that was going through closure. Back in the early 1990s, and when it closed, it did enormous damage to the community, and so to see South Crofty getting its permits back, and Mick Davies from Vision Blue, the old Extrada guys, has put $25 million into that to try and get that up and running. And the locals there, they understand the benefit of what mining can bring. They understand the risks as well, but they understand that generally it's a win-win. And I think with Anglesey, with Paris Mountain, the locals, for the last 35, 40 years, anyone that drives out of the town, the first thing they see on the hill is a head frame, and there's been no benefits to the community. So, of course, I wouldn't be doing this if we couldn't bring those benefits to the community. Yes, I mean, we've got shareholders. We have to look after shareholders as well. But fundamentally, when I look at the preliminary economic assessment we've done, we will be spending around about $40 to $50 million a year in US dollars a year into the community in terms of wages, suppliers, and that's not including taxes that are paid. So look, hopefully people realise we're serious about looking after locals. And the other part of my experience in Australia, and I was in Australia for 20 years, and I saw a lot of, and was involved in a lot of companies that had fly in, fly out operations. And the damage that does to family life is horrific. I mean, it's very high case of divorces and spousal abuse and stuff like that. So it's you want your workforce to be able to go home every night.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear, Joe. And then excellent question from Gwendon Holiday Homes. Would you be mindful of encouraging tourists to visit? Active mining is great, but have you considered how Zip World have done it? We could have a great tourist attraction. I think again back to the our philosophy for mining this is all underground. So it's very hard you can't really coexist with an underground mine and a tourist destination, but maybe end of the mine life. There's certainly sort of mine tours and stuff you could do. I mean, I'm down in Cornwall now. There's a few of the old tin mines down here that do that. I don't know about putting zip wires into the old surface workings. I think that's there's some rather pleasant chuffs in the might get upset about that. But look, part of any mine is you have to have a closure plan, and we have to submit this with our consent application that we'll do over the course of the next couple of months. And in that closure plan, we will
we've always seen ourselves as the next line of heritage of this wonderful mountain. And so our mine closure plan will most definitely include expanding the tourist appeal to the overall mountain. Sure.
Oh, brilliant. And then Stephen Knight says all these things take time to turn into reality, but very glad they're happening. Barbara Clare said school visits, learning about the history of the mountain. Do these happen at the moment? I don't think there's school visits there, but I think that's probably quite a good idea.
Well, I mean, we sponsored the Bull Bay Pro-Am last July, I think early July. And one of the questions that I was asked afterwards was, it was from one of the school teachers, and I need to follow up on this. He said, that the school does one day a year talking about the history of the mountain, and this gentleman said, well, what do we tell them now? Well, what's going to happen? I said, look, how about I come and tell them? Because I think there's an opportunity here to have this project up and running for our initial mine life is 12 years. I think there's a lot of exploration upside on the mountain, and that 12 years could end up being 20 or 30 years. And so the kids at school now, the kids at the local senior high, I mean, that's the potential workforce, right? So I'm more than happy to go in there anytime, and likewise, I'm more happy to have them up on site and show them around and just explain what mining is. Trust me, Virginia, mining.
No, that's great. No, that's great. So either teachers either get in touch with you or they get in touch with me, and I'll share the details. And Barbara says Amlock and surrounding areas are desperately in need of investment. Obviously, we've lost Wilbur, where my dad worked. We've Octel, we've got the Roscorp site. We've seen disinvestment after disinvestment, and the Rehow, which closed December 2019 as well. These were really good local good quality jobs, and that's what I've been trying to do ever since the island elected me, is really work very, very hard both on the island and in Westminster to try and bring those good quality jobs. And I've been taking lots of companies around the island, and I always seem to drop in on Blueberries in Amlock or the Gadleys Hotel, and taking all of these businesses around, and their average salaries are more than double the average on the island. And that leads me into Natasha Holland's question. What type of employment would be offered? Would it be seasonal? Would it be 0 hours? Stability is what is lacking on the island.
No, look, I mean, the 120. When we look at the potential job numbers, we talk that the 120 we talk about is 120 full-time direct employees actually at the mine, and that will range from secretaries, cleaners, diesel mechanics, electrical fitters, miners. My personal view is if you can be a farmer or a fisherman, you can be a miner. It's just driving gear underground as opposed to on the water. I don't want to be flippant about those roles at all, but the skill sets are very transferable. It was not 0 hours. I mean, it's going to be we're looking at full-time employees, and hopefully for multi generations. In terms of the 500 we talk about, 400 to 500, that's it. That's the non-direct full-time job. So that's the community, the supply chain and all that kind of stuff. So look, if we get this up and running, and again, you put a lot of pressure on us there, Virginia, by sort of going through all those businesses that closed down, because we have to be driven by the economics of it. So let's sort of hope that the economics demonstrate that it's a viable project. I think it will be, and from that point, it's a these we want to be offering jobs for 10, 15, 20 years to these people.
Mark McGuire says it'd be great for the island if this project is economically viable and the associated gains from the mine, tourism and education. And then Annabelle Ackroyd, you really must meet this lady, Joe. She says there are lots of benefits to the community the first time it was open. The specialist miners stayed locally during the week and spent their money locally, as well as employing local workers. There were lots of companies involved, including Anglesey mining, cementation mining, and ore drilling, to name but a few. So this lady surely knows her stuff.
Yeah,
she does. And then I had few more questions being emailed in. So how is the environment impact survey progressing? Any idea of a completion date and what's next on the agenda?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's going incredibly well. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, we're not seeing anything that we didn't expect to see. Well, again, we'll be perfectly candid with everybody. We found one great crested newt. which was a huge surprise, was given the pH of the water up there. But we can deal with that. There's a process to deal with that. Everything else up there from an environmental perspective is pretty much what you'd expect. It's pretty yes, it's a fairly, well, it's a hostile environment for anything natural. And we've done the sort of the amphibian surveys, and everything is stunted, and just because of the poisons in the water there. So they're just exposed to that naturally. But in terms of what's next, well, we've just completed a soil survey around the mountains, so we know and that was in conjunction with the Welsh government to look at sort of grading and reclassifying, not us reclassifying, but having the soils reclassified, which is done regularly. So we've sort of piggybacked off that. The next stages after that is we have to do some site geotech work and some groundwater geoscience work, just to make sure that we don't, just so we know how deep footings have to go for buildings and process plant and stuff like that. And really, we've done all the seasonal surveys for the wildlife. And again, we're piggybacking off information that was done 30 years ago, and there's no changes to it. So, we're fairly relaxed about that. But it's a process. You've got to go through this process. You can't fast track any of this. Put it that way.
Joe, we can't have a Freeport Facebook Live without mentioning Freeport. This is something I've been working on for the last 3 years. Really excited about this. We're going through the governance phase at the moment, but it's got the potential to bring 3,000 jobs in the near term, going to £13,500 and £1 billion of economic investment. So how do you see Freeport status benefiting you? How can you capitalise on that?
Well, I mean, I think there's a number of ways, and I think initially, we're going to be importing equipment, to build the mine, build the process plant. I mean, most of that stuff comes from overseas. So in terms of having an active or more active port with more opportunities there, then that's going to create more opportunity for us. But in terms of like being active within the port itself as a business, look, I mean, one of the opportunities we see is that we'll produce a relatively small amount of what we call gravity gold, which is just gold that just literally drops out by gravity. For anybody that's seen all those gold rush shows on Discovery Channel, they'll understand what I'm talking about. And it needs to be cleaned and refined. So there's an opportunity to put a small refinery within the Freeport area, and do something sort of quite interesting with the Welsh gold that comes out of that. So look, I mean, it's early days. But
you mentioned gold. You mentioned gold, Joe. What other metals are going to be coming out of the ground, and what sort of what's going to be the most important thing that comes out of the ground? Let's put that into context.
Yeah, I mean, good question. In terms of if you look at over the life of the operation, in terms of revenue, about 50% of the revenue comes from copper, and about 35% from zinc, and the rest is a combination of lead, silver, and gold. But in this sort of rush to transition the economy, decarbonize the economy, three of the most important transition metals are copper, zinc, and silver. And look, I mean, we're still going to have to export the concentrate because we don't have concentrate processing facilities in the UK, and unless someone's going to permit a smelter, which I doubt, it's got to go offshore. But we can certainly make ourselves a little bit more self-sufficient than we are currently. And the silver and the gold, I mean, we can utilize that domestically. I mean, quite simply. So it's just as countries, we want to learn to help ourselves again, right? SOS, security of supply. I mean, it's all about security of supply.
That's great, Joe, and I think that's a really, really strong ending. And I would say thank you very much, Jock and Val, for joining us all here on Anglesey tonight. And if people want to get in touch with you, they can drop you an email, joe.battershill@angleseamining.co.uk. That's Joe Battershill@angleseamining.co.uk, or they can get in touch with me and I will share their details. But I'd like to say thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to going to see The Wizard of Oz tonight. And I'd like to thank Steve Blankley, who is the Tin Man, who I'm very looking forward to seeing the performance. And a big shout out to the Breeze Hill Bar and Eatery and Hotel here in Bentley for allowing me to do my Facebook Live here. And I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday for another of my Freeport Facebook Lives. I've got a few exciting guests lined up, so please do look out on my social media, and you'll be able to see who I've got joining. But thank you so much, Joy and Joe. Have a lovely evening, and look forward to catching up soon. Take care. Jock about.
Thank you. Bye.